Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging Soonercon. Set sail once again for the high seas of Oklahoma's longest running pop culture convention. A fun weekend awaits you full of cosplay, shopping, celebrity autographs, panels, and the after hours events. Set up in the Embassy Suites in Norman, Oklahoma, you'll find a fantastic geeky weekend, June 19th through 21st, 2026. Visit Soonercon.com for details. Back on today, we have Braxton Cosby. I'm going to remind you, he is the head of the Cosby Media Group. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing fantastic. The last time you were here, you just blew me away
Wow.
by the way that you have. Number one, you're a very prolific writer, but you
Thank
don't just keep cranking out the same kind of material. You do comics, you do scripts, you do novels, and you do them back to back to back to back. And
you.
I love that kind of dynamic. I don't have that brain. I will tell you that right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I just want you to tell me what you just came out with.
Yeah, so excited about this new project of mine. I've done trilogies and series that are ongoing now, so I decided to take on something a little bit different, really different in a couple of ways. One is I decided to jump into the concept of a duology, which means that you drop a series with only two legs to it. So I came out with, rather than two books, I came out with a book and a graphic novel. And the subject matter I tackled this time around, normally I've written in health and wellness, I've written in inspiration, I've written autobiographies, I've written fiction, science fiction, speculative fiction, and also a little bit of fantasy. But this time I jumped into the realm of historical fiction. And so it was something I met a person at a convention I was at, and I just happened I was just intrigued with the whole concept of historical fiction. So I started asking him questions about it and everything. And he was like, yeah, this is my book. It's about X, Y, and Z. And he kind of went through all these details. And I was like, man, that sounds really cool. Just kind of left it alone. And then, you know how it is, you're just scrolling on the internet. And then one day I saw this image of this character pop up, and it was a black man dressed as a samurai. And I started doing research on it. I was like, what is this? And then I heard about this guy named Yasuke, and there was a lot of mystery around his upbringing and him. I'm thinking in my mind immediately, feudal Japan was the era. How does a black man become a samurai in feudal Japan? And so I started doing a little bit of digging, and I found out, that he was slave who was brought on to the service of a lord in Japan, feudal Japan, and then eventually became a samurai. So those were like, I needed to know answers to these questions in my head that were automatically buzzing. And as I did a deep dive, I really found a lot of information about just the concept of Yasuki, but not actually the information that was missing. And so I went a little bit deeper. I said, okay, well, feudal Japan at this time, what was the economy like? What was the history like? What were the lords and the shogunate and the emperors like? And how were the warring factions? And what were the people like? What was the civilization like in that time period? And I wanted to know seasons and everything, trade, blah blah blah. I went into the whole deep, 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 deep. And as I pulled all this information out, what I found was that there wasn't a lot about Yasuki, the person himself. So it was all the events around him that were happening, and there were some gaps missing. So I said, man, this would really be cool to write a story on. I could see historical fiction coming to life here. And so I tell people after all that information, I had notes and notes and notes and notes. And as I started working on the outline, I really had to go and do like a timeline of starting early in the 1500s when Yasuke was actually enslaved from the Sudan, and then how he traveled across the oceans to land in Japan, and then what happened then. And so I got all these pieces, but I didn't have the how it happened. And so that was then my role. I knew his beginning, I knew his ending, and then even the ending was mysterious because there wasn't a lot of detail about what happened to him at the end of Lord Nobunaga's reign. where he was overthrown in a coup by his main general. There was no information on what happened in Suki after that too. So I was like, okay, this is where as a writer, it's my role now to put the fiction. And I tell people I have the factual elements, which I conceptualize as the brick, and it was my job to put the mortar in place to bring everything together and build this foundation of a fantastic story around Yasuke. So that is basically how it was birthed. I finished it. I think I've spoken to you before about my goal as a writer. This is book 21 for me, is to always write my next favorite book that I can be proud of, that I can really love and get behind. And after so many books that I loved that I really was like, how am I going to pull this off? I actually did it with Yasuke. And so the novel, Yasuke, Dead Man Walking, was birthed. I was happy with it. And then I said, well, there's another component missing here. What happened after Yasuke? And so I thought it would be an amazing idea to come up with a graphic novel, basically featuring artistic style that was manga with black characters. So I can actually create a black manga story, almost paying homage to Afro Samurai. And that's what I did. I basically partnered with a talented artist named Eliza Olamide, who worked on our ANVK comic series from Coyote Champion, which was African Ninja Vampire Killers. I loved her artistic style, and I thought it kind of paid homage to that before it, and that was basically it. So we had the novel, which was the true to life kind of fictional, historical fictional prose, and then with the ending, I came up with an ending to kind of make sense, and it just bled right into the purely fantasy graphic novel, which is a 75-page graphic novel. And I grew up in a time with Asian culture I was exposed to back as a kid, where there was a thing called Samurai Sunday. And those shows came on every Sunday at 7 o'clock at night. And it would just be all these fantastic stories of Chinese and Japanese stories that I just loved as a kid. 2-hour film, on TV. And so I wanted to pay some respect to that as well. So basically, we've got all that great dramatization with fighting, but we also at the heart of it, we have a really, really solid story that continues to be the thing that drove Yasuke through the historical fiction novel, which was really just he was a slave taken away and separated from his family, and he wants to get back to his family. So he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And that was really the overall theme of the story through both novels, which is a complete duology. And so I'm really happy. I'm happy the way both things came out. We just released the book on and the duology together on February 3rd, and we hit #1 on Amazon for Kindle for both. So I'm very, very grateful to all those fans and everyone who came out to support us. And we've already got things lined up with book signings and conventions coming up. So I'm just thrilled to get this work out to all of the fan base out there, people who know me, who love to support my work. And I feel like 2026 is going to be just fantastic and a great opportunity for Yasuke to really reach the masses with all the deep history behind him, with the nice fictional elements that kind of tie everything together.
I am vaguely familiar with the picture you referenced at the beginning of that because I know I've seen that, and I'm a fan of history myself, and I do enjoy the cases where you can find a moment like that. It's like, okay, this is a thing, and I need more information on that. And you're very fortunate that you were able to find some information on that just to build a story from it.
Absolutely.
I'm also, I will admit, I am a fan of parallel history stories, of stories where we're going to tell you how things didn't happen, but maybe you want them to have happened that way.
Right.
So can I ask you a question about the comic book?
Okay.
Okay. Now, based on your research, and I'm assuming that you know probably 70% or more of all the information known about this person at this point. Is there a reason that couldn't have happened? I'm not saying it happened that way. I'm saying, do we know?
Right. I would say yes. Obviously, there's probabilities of everything, right? Couldn't have happened. We maybe never walked on the moon. All those things that are out there as conspiracy. But I just pressed into the fact that this made a lot of sense. And in my intuitive mind of trying to figure out how it made sense, I was able to pull in elements of great storytelling where it was about, okay, let's pose the question. Why would somebody take a person of that stature and elevate them? And I didn't want to go just superficial. Well, he was big. He was this big black guy in Japan where everybody's smaller and it just looks intimidating. That might be the initial knee-jerk response, which I did actually add that element in there, but I wanted to go deeper. I built relationships for the family that existed. It was not just a story of a fish out of water, which is where essentially Yasuke was. I mean, he was this person in this brand new land, didn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture, the concepts, the society. This happened over multiple years of being under the service of Nobunaga. So how does he elevate? What does he do? And so I took the basic premise of three-act structure with the initial failures, the inciting incident, the bad guys closing in. You start to see the rumblings because then why was there a coup? What happened there? So regardless of it being factual stuff, it was actually just a fantastic framework for a wonderful story. And, I'm just a stick with the three-act structure that I just took all of that. And where I had the spine, I added the muscles, the ligaments, the organs, and all of the skin and everything just to kind of really flesh this whole thing out. And it became this fantastic story with this, and it's a nice landing pad for me because it's historical fiction. It's not just an autobiographical depiction of Yasuke, which it is out there. But I was able to go another different direction and make something that felt real. And I've gotten quite a few reviews from some nice review boards out there. And one of the folks from Literary Titan gave it a 5-star review. And they said, listen, the elements that play out in this historical fiction story felt so real. They can't decide what was real and what was fiction. And everything felt earned. And I knew that that was my goal. When you finally see him become Yasuke, because he's not Yasuke until Lord Nobunaga gives him that name. So he has to be some other name, which didn't exist. I had to come up with another name. I had to go into Sudan history and figure out all the names and how they named their children and what those meanings mean. So I pulled out all this information just to make it so heavy and rich. And even coming down to him having a wife and a daughter. What would the daughter's name be? How would that be significant? What would be their connection? Why would he have this affinity for other children that he may have met in Japan? So all these things just felt so real and so organic that when the reader would read it, my goal was to make sure that they understood that this was something that wasn't just popped in. It felt so real and natural. And like you said, when he finally becomes Yasuke, it felt earned. It felt genuine. And so that's really what I played off of. And because there's such a secrecy behind Yasuke being this black samurai, that felt real. A lot of history of black folks in the world has been hidden because it is an infringement on the cultures of the world and the way of life and the things that things are supposed to be. So for me, it just felt like, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So I wanted to capture that in the story and make it play out that way that people were like, oh yeah, I can accept that. I definitely embrace that. And it wasn't anything gaudy where he just this badass goes in. It was like, no, it was truly a fish out of water story where he faltered a lot in the beginning and had to figure out how to live in this place. He even had to learn the language. And you see that gradually happen over time. He had a mentor who taught him the ways of the samurai and the ways of the Japanese in that time, how you bow, how you like all of that is just played out very well. I thought that the TV show Shogun, the limited series that they did on FX, was done so well. And so it really took on that type of a tone as I was writing it. I wanted to have this nice pacing to the story that was slow enough to give you the rich history, but then it picked up with these great action sequences that weren't forced. They were just naturally in 1580 this, 80 this or 80 that, 90 something, this war broke out. So how did Nobunaga respond to that? He had a group that they had they had his military leaders. They would actually have meetings, and they eventually started allowing Yasuke to come to meetings just to observe. And then eventually he became someone who sat at the table. So all of that was just it felt so authentic and real. I was just really enamored by it. And so I, as much as I created the story for other people, it felt like I was almost celebrating Black history in a way, and that's why it was so important for me to get the book and the duology done and released in Black History Month, so that it was paying homage to a fantastic story of someone who persevered through a lot of resistance.
Sure. And I love the word you're using there, the word earned, because that really becomes the crux of it there. You're not making fan fiction of a photo you saw. You did the research, you looked at the culture, you looked at the situation,
Mhm.
and you created, within the best of any of our abilities, a three-dimensional world to tell this story. And that is history.
Yes,
And it's only a matter of how much detail you have to work with. And because of a lot of reasons, we don't always have the sources that we wish we had.
right.
So you do your best. And I think as long as we acknowledge that you did make up this part of it, but you researched that part of it, I think this is going to be very valuable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And and being conscious because we went through years and seasons and what happens in the winter in this world, how do people adapt to that? What are the animals like? What are the food sources like? How did they, they had these characters had real meetings as a group and a community, and they started saying, okay, we need resources now. We don't have this. Well, who are we trading with this clan? What about this? Oh, and there's also the Buddhists out there who are doing this, and there's the ninjas. Like it was a real world. The world of feudal Japan to me was so fascinating that I wanted to make it its own character, and it spoke in the writing. You know what I mean? And so these people had to really operate within this world. They had to make sure they had trades, and they had to have partnerships, and they had to have alliances. And what about this clan? Would they come along our side? So all of this navigation is done. That's why the book opens up. The first three chapters are not even about Yasuke. It's about Lord Nobunaga, how he started as a young man. And I came up with that on my own, this fictional story of how maybe Nobunaga was this hardcore leader, but what did he start out when he was young? Was he a spoiled guy who had the world at his fingertips? Did he abuse that power? Was he a womanizer? Did he have women? All that stuff opens up in the first three chapters, and then you're kind of probably sitting as a reader going, well, where's Yasuki? Did I get the wrong book? But I felt like it was important because Nobunaga was a reflection of this world I was building of feudal Japan. He was everything that feudal Japan was and was not because of his behavior was rejecting his inheritance as this natural born leader and ruler. And so we have those two kind of opposing forces working, and then eventually it comes to this, it basically opens the door for Yasuki to kind of come in. And so I just think it just worked out so well. It was almost God breathed.
And if I'm reading that book, I'm not wondering where Yusuke is in those first couple of chapters. I'll confess I haven't read the book yet,
Yeah,
but you're setting the table, you're building the world, and a lot of people don't know a whole lot about feudal Japan, or if they do, they're pulling from a body of work that's now decades out of date.
right, absolutely.
I would say, and I'll just tell my perspective. I went to grade school in the 80s, I went to high school in the 90s,
Mhm.
and when world history is told, you kind of tell the story of Europe and the Americas.
Right,
And for the most part, Asia and Africa doesn't really get talked about till
right,
you get to the late 1800s.
right.
And they just kind of gloss over it saying, well, not much really went on there. And anybody who actually knows about those areas will say that is bullshit.
Absolutely.
But that's how and it's been a very recent thing where that trend has changed. So when we're going to start teaching people about this, we need to start teaching them from the perspective of stuff written recently with
Right,
new research, with people who are trying to build a more three-dimensional view of world history.
right. Absolutely.
And so I'm really glad that you're taking this tack, and I'm not trying to put all the burden on you writing your Yusuke story. That's not for you to care. But it's like, no, this you're getting people interested. You're telling them that the history is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, to me, it's I was a big history buff myself in school as well. But I think also when you are a student of the arts and writing is one of those things. And I have a fascination for story. And so if you give me something to work with, I'm like, man, where can I go with this? I'm already fat. I'm thinking of all these angles, and I'm like getting excited about it. And then on top of that, understanding the fundamentals of world building, but also creating 360-degree characters that have everything, that breathe, that have personalities, that speak to you as a writer. And then placing that in place as these dominoes fall into three-act structure, it just becomes magic to me. So I felt like almost like somewhat guilty that I stumbled upon something so amazingly rich because there was a framework that I just could just throw things at and just stick on and make it as beautiful as I wanted it to be.
And obviously adding your own touch to it there, and then you get the advantage of taking on a fantasy element there. That's just, it's fun for everybody.
Yeah,
But I mean, how many people got into Japanese culture because of anime?
right. Absolutely. For sure.
You're continuing that tradition
Yeah.
in a very worthwhile way.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, that's one of those cases where we we're just making it, we're showing people the appeal of a different perspective, of a different aesthetic, a
Hmm.
different cultural backdrop.
Yeah, absolutely. And um for me to send this out, reader's favorite gave it 5 stars. It's up for book of the year for historical fiction. They're very tight. I thought you gave it 5 stars. Um, Kirkus Reviews, of all people, gave it the accolade of get it. They basically tell people, you go read it, it's going to say get it. That's their verdict. Their verdict is get it. And for people in the reviews, for me to hear those key elements come out about they understand the writing. Midwest Review said like the beauty of the writing, the way that he brought about the world building, and you can kind of feel like you're dropped into the setting of feudal Japan with the sunsets and the weather and all those are the things I was like, please get this, for them to get it. It just feels like a really special project to me, to be quite honest. And I'm just really, really excited about it.
Now, I'm going to have to get a little geeky here. As somebody who does like history and who's involved in a big research project right now, what do you do to keep track of all the reading and note taking that you do?
Man, I'm telling you, I dropped it into Word documents by date and errors, and I would just bold it. The economy, society, religion, weather, weather, like how long was their winters? How long were their spring? Like I basically tried to plug all of that in. Trade. What was something like with Nobunaga's clan? What was it about them that they had that other people wanted? And what were the resources that other people had that they needed? You know what I mean? So then it became this arm wrestling match where we have to keep that alliance to do. So I wanted to make sure I can put all that in there. So it became a military story. It became a religious sect story because then he had the Buddhists against. I mean, it was just a lot going on, and still keeping the respect of this. I mean, because at the end of the day, with world building, people live a life in that world. So I didn't want it to be so cut and dry that it was just about Yasuke. It was always about, hey, how are we going to survive? What's the next step? How do we build this? How do we continue to grow? He had a son that he was bringing up, Lord Nobunaga, to be the next heir. And was this son the perfect um, um, prodigy, to be who he felt? No, he didn't reflect his way. He was on that path, but he wasn't just what daddy wanted. So how does that relationship play out? And that was the opportunity for Yasuke to kind of step in, and almost be like an older brother. So that allowed him, and as their relationship grew, then Nobunaga started noticing. And then there was the opportunity for him to kind of get closer. So all of this played out beautifully. And then of course, you love that mystical element with Asian culture where it's like, what's that? Wait a minute, how'd that guy heal him? That kind of a thing. So I was able to play with those elements a little bit. And then there's the mystery about like the compound was built, and then outside of it was like nobody goes to the forest. Well, why not? Well, there's whispers of a dark entity that lives out there. There's a magic. We don't mess with that. So I kind of introduced that idea in the novel, but then I came back with the comic, which is basically Blood Moon, which is a Yasuki story. So if you want to hear or want to find out more about that story about Chiwa, this is his origin story in this comic. So it allowed me to just really kind of give a whole world to this thing that I mean, I'm really really, really excited about what I think people are going to read and enjoy.
And I'm not in the business of giving away spoilers, so I'm not going to try to push you for specific plot points because I think we've already whetted the audience's appetite quite enough on that
Yeah.
front. But are you planning on continuing this going forward, or maybe adding installments or spinning off to different topics that are connected to this?
I don't know if you're familiar with Harriet Tubman Demon Slayer.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So, basically you take a concept and you build on it and you make something totally fresh and new. Almost similar to like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer kind of a thing. We will be seeing Yasuke come back the way that the graphic novel ends. I'll leave it at that.
Mhm.
We will see Yasuke in another iteration doing something greater going forward, for sure, in comic book world.
All right. Well, I again, not pushing you for details, but just liking knowing that this has enough legs that we can continue onward there.
Absolutely.
I will ask while we're on the topic of the mixing real history, and there's a certain podcast I've always been a fan of where it's a historical podcast by a guy who claims he's not a historian, but is damn good at what he does. But he's a great storyteller, and that's who you are too.
Oh, thank you.
Um, are you familiar with Dan Carlin?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay. DanCarlin.com. I would suggest you go there and you are going to just pick whatever you seem to like and just start listening. You don't need to listen to them in order,
Okay.
but there's all sorts of really cool stuff there. Like
Okay.
there's one episode where he will go into the history of naval travel and basically the discovery of what we now call the Americas.
Very
And
cool.
he starts off by saying, if you were an alien who landed on Earth and you were betting who would cross the ocean first, you would bet on the Chinese.
Right.
And then he goes into a whole bit as to why that didn't happen.
Right, right,
And
right.
and that's, I think, right up your alley. And that's why I find this kind of story fascinating, is that you don't know how history is going to play out when
Right.
you're in it. You only know from backwards. And
Absolutely.
that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
say you saw a photo and this is a fascinating story, and you're like, why? How did we get from here to there? And I don't know about this.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's very similar to God, what's that? And I looked at this show. I don't know why I just drew a blank. It's on Apple TV. For All Mankind. Have you
Hmm.
seen that before?
I have, it's on my list of things to watch in the very near future.
So I know you love sci-fi. You're a sci-fi guy.
Hmm.
And I'll be honest, right? I was like, I'm not gonna look at this. This looks too slow. You know, so it's alternate universe. It starts in the 60s, and every season they jump a decade. So they're actually caught up to us now. But the way they retell the story, like, did the US really land on the moon first? They kind of play with that. And the guys who are behind it are the folks who did the Battlestar Galactica reboot, which I was a huge fan of. So when I found out that they were behind, I'm like, all right, let me settle in and be patient and watch this thing. So they did a fantastic job with it. So if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. But yeah, so I'm intrigued with having now this baby in my hands that I can change the way that the world has progressed and the with an alternate reality. So yeah, so I'm really really excited and geeked out about it too.
Okay. Well, last thing before I let you go, I want to talk about getting you in touch with your audience here, because really everything you're telling me is that people, I want them to go out, get this book, read this comic, but where can we go talk to you about it after we do that? You're going to hit conventions, you're going to be on
Oh yeah.
podcasts. Where are we at?
First 7 months of the year, we're already booked out. I'm going to be this month is big. I've already I did a big spiel at one of the local schools here on February 3rd, the day we launched Itsuki. So got a chance to talk to a lot of kids there. I'm going to be planning to go to some of the libraries. I made a connection with the libraries in local Lawrenceville, Georgia. And I'm also heading out. I'm going to be at Liberty Books doing a book signing this weekend, February 7th, downtown Lawrenceville. February 21st, I'll be at the Barnes& and Noble in Beaufort, Georgia. In March, I'm going to be at the Huntsville Comic-Con in Huntsville, Alabama. April, we're going to be at South Carolina Comic-Con. That's going to be huge in Greenville. In May, we're doing First Comic Saturday right there in downtown Lawrenceville. Liberty Books is going to be hosting me again. In June, I think we're going to be in, Charlotte, North Carolina at HeroesCon. And then in July, I think where we're going to be in July. July is going to be, I don't know where we're going to be at in July. I know we're going to be somewhere in July. But either way, we're going to have all on the website anyway. As far as cosmediaproductions.com, you'll be able to go in there and see our calendar of events. Please come out and see us, man. We're going to have my four-headed monster, as I say, my Mount Rushmore of series. We've got science fiction with the Red Gemini Chronicles that has my Steel Rain series in it. It also has the Star-Crossed Saga. We have Kisa and the Broken series for dystopian fiction and people like that. Now we've got Yasuke with the historical fiction / fantasy manga story. And of course, our old favorite throwbacks. We have the Cape series with Paladin and Icon and everybody. So you guys will be able to come out and get a little bit of everything that you want, that you're into as far as fiction fandom. So just hit us up on Instagram. You can go to starchild_comic or Cosmedia Productions. Throw us a line, reach out in a DM, say, hey man, where y'all gonna be next? We'll answer you and we'd love to see you.
Now, I'm pretty sure by the time this hits the feed, some of those February dates might be in the rearview mirror, but everything else, I think we're going to give you a chance that we'll ping the people at those cons there, let them know, hey, this is going to be a big deal. And I'll tell you, I haven't hit those cons before, but I've heard really good things, so I have high hopes for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have yourself a great year, and I hope to see you at the same con one of these days.
Absolutely, please. Thank you so much for having me on.